I'm Michael Williams. I'm head of programming here at the Wheeler Centre. I was going to do my introduction tonight in Tetum, but as I was dredging through my memories of that language, I realised I can only remember the insults that children taught me. So if you want to be told you look like a monkey after the session, I am your man for that. So do feel free to ask me for that. But we have such a distinguished panel and such a lot of ground to cover that I'll leave the insults till afterwards. To my immediate left, we have Abel Guterres, who's Timor-Leste's ambassador to Australia. Abel first arrived here as a refugee in 1975, and between then and 1999, he really was one of the heroes of the resistance movement here in Australia. He's certainly one of my personal heroes, and it's a thrill to be sharing a stage with him. He's just named his son Miguel, which I understand was after me. It seemed a bit over the top, frankly, but I'm touched, so thank you, Abel. It's very good to see you. Robert Connelly is one of Australia's finest storytellers. He's a writer and director of the feature films The Bank, $3, and most recently Balibo. Robert is an extraordinary filmmaker. He's also a producer. Together with his business partner John Maynard, he produced the films Romulus, My Father, and The Boys, and he's done a lot to introduce the world to other amazing directors and storytellers. So welcome, Robert. And finally, Jill Jolliffe. Anyone who's worked in the solidarity movement for East Timor in Australia for any length of time knows Jill and her work and is indebted to Jill. She's been following the Balibo 5 story in particular for 34 years. She witnessed the first incursions of Indonesian regular troops into East Timor in September 1975, reported on the death of her 5 colleagues at Balibo in October, and was evacuated from Dili by the International Red Cross 4 days before Indonesian paratroopers attacked the capital on the 7th of December 1975. Jill is also the founder and creator of the Living Memory Project, which is what brings us here tonight. But before we get into that, which is pretty weighty territory, I want a raucous cheer of appreciation for our 3 panellists. Excellent. I think we're started. Now, I imagine this is an audience that is very intimately acquainted with the struggle for independence in East Timor and in the challenges, in the heartache of that campaign and the triumphs. But I thought, Mr. Ambassador, to get things started, Abel, could you talk a bit about how Timor is at the moment?
Thank you, Michael, and good evening to everyone. There's many familiar faces. And some I've known since 1975, so it's great to be here. And I want to thank Wheeler Centre for inviting me here to be part of the panel. And I want to also acknowledge Jill Jolliffe and her team, who have done this wonderful work in recording the stories of the prisoners. Because when you have a huge competing demands, these are often the stories that would get lost, in between or in the middle of it. And also, Rob with Balibo film that I've had people calling me about, even children, school kids who also talk about it, who have seen it, and so, in a sense, it does cement the friendship between Australia and Timorese, or Australians and East Timorese. Now, just to give you an update of what is happening inside Timor-Leste, is that number one, there is security and peace. That is, it's just the most important thing. And next year, of course, we're going into election, and from the signs that things are good, there is a certain maturity in democracy. There is not much of rock throwing or highly emotional issues that people deal with physically. And so, in a sense, this gives us hope hope for the generation, and hope to build a country and build a better place for everybody. And not only to build a country, but also share the wealth that there is, and make sure no one is left behind and live on rubbish bins. And I'm sure this will happen. And security issue is of course a very important issue. Our police force have gone through changes and into training to upgrade their professional capacity, and they are maintaining security quite well. They're taking over almost all the districts now in Timor-Leste, and this is a very good sign. But also the defense force as well. The training is going on to upgrade their skills and knowledge in terms of how to defend the country, rather than go into fighting with their counterparts, the police force, which happened in 2006. Although, it was much instigated by some political maneuvering. But that is, I think, part of being a new country. Sometimes people expect quite a lot from a young country, that after 24 years of traumatic experiences, it probably take another 24 years for that trauma to subside, and kids who grow up in an environment of violence, they don't know what normal life is all about. So when they deal with issues, they go on a highly emotional charge and physical. And that's, of course, that's what's been has happened, over the years. But on a whole, the government has a motto of saying goodbye conflict and welcome development. And this is very much the theme that we want to keep pursuing, that we definitely want to say goodbye to the conflict and move forward with the development, and so that the institutions of the states can be consolidated, deliver of the services to the people, especially people who live in rural areas, who don't get enough attention. And the government since 2007 have done wonderful work, despite enormous challenges in terms of skills and knowledge of the bureaucrats to deliver the services as quick as they can, or spend them the money, the budget. But having the pensions for the disabled and the war veterans and the over 60s, that really have injected cash into the villages. So people who are who are old age, at least they see something. They get something that they want to buy something for their grandchildren. They've got something to do. So, in a sense, it is moving the cash and the economic movement within the villages as well. That is very important. And also there were other projects that the government came into being. So all these is to really, from somebody from outside, sometimes it's difficult to understand how you balance the demands of the young people, this huge energy that is there. I mean, more than 50% of the people are under 25. So you have this young, huge body of energy who, most of the time have no jobs, and so they go into misshifts sometimes. But in terms of balancing all that, government is trying its best, but we're hopeful, and the government, Prime Minister Janana Guzmão is doing all he can to really consolidate the institutions of the state to really deliver the services to the people, especially people, most of them who live in rural areas. The health and sanitation issues, clean water, food production, I mean, all these issues, this is a daily issue that confront the people. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that we will overcome the challenges that we've had, and we are really, I think, turning the corner. But the elections next year will further consolidate that in terms of completely say goodbye to the conflict. And we wait and see.
As if the challenges for a young nation weren't enough, that tension that you talk about wanting to say goodbye to the conflict on the one hand, but on the other hand, the need to do justice to a country and a people who have been through such trauma, brings us, I guess, to the idea behind the Living Memory Project. Jill, could you talk a bit about the genesis of that project and where it came from?
Yes, certainly. Good night and good evening, and thank you very much for coming in such numbers. It's wonderful to see people coming here to listen, to learn a little bit about the Living Memory Project. And I'd also like to thank the Victorian Women's Trust and the Multicultural Commission for supporting this event this evening, as well as the Wheeler Centre. The Living Memory Project arose, as many of you know, I've been a journalist on the issue of Timor for many years, and during the years of the Indonesian occupation from 1975 to 1999, I was a banned person by the Indonesian government. I couldn't enter into East Timor, and I lived in Portugal for those 2 decades, and lived very closely to the East Timorese community, with whom I built a relationship, and they supplied me with a great deal of information about what was happening in East Timor, and I was able to write articles from there, and I began to see a pattern emerging of that involved torture. I interviewed some of the first torture victims who came to Lisbon and spoke, and I worked with Amnesty International's International Secretariat in London on this theme. And but principally, I hadn't met these people who'd been tortured or the political prisoners, but I'd written about them, and they felt like real people to me, very much so. But I hadn't met them in person until after the Indonesian withdrawal in 1999. I was able to return to East Timor. I was actually still officially banned by the Indonesian government, even after they'd left, from visiting Indonesia. And the UN initially did not support my entry into East Timor after 1999 because I was banned by Indonesia. I was denied. I had to get an Indonesian visa, but I was still denied that. But anyway, I eventually got there, and I met up with the people that I'd been writing about for many years in The Age and the Canberra Times, The Guardian in London, various other newspapers. And that was a really moving moment for me to see these people coming out of prison that I'd been writing about. And I met the leaders of ASEPPOL, the former Political Prisoners Association, which had been formed as people were coming out of the prisons, and had a discussion with them. The 3 people I spoke with, first of all, were Jacinto Alves, Francisco Branco, and Gregorio Saldaña, all of whom had been involved with organising the Santa Cruz demonstration, which is well known to you all, which ended in that terrible massacre. And I said to them, we have to do something to record what's happened. What do you think? How can we register this story? I would like to hear your stories. I would like you to tell your own stories. And I was very interested in the idea of creating a video archive, and I put that to them. I said, I think that would be the best way to preserve the story. What do you think? And from that, and they agreed, absolutely. And from that, the Living Memory Project was born with the help of ASEPPOL, and some of our staff who are sitting here tonight were members of ASEPPOL at the time. I think Maria da Silva Benfica is a member of ASEPPOL, and perhaps Olga too. Elvis was still too young to be a member of ASEPPOL. So we began filming. We began the first films in 2001. We experimented and we filmed 3 people, I think, at that time, using international filmmakers, because at that time there were no really qualified East Timorese filmmakers, and we had a grant from the Northern Illinois University, which was setting up something called the Southeast Asia Digital Archive, and they gave us a grant to start filming. And so we were able to employ some internationals, and among them was a woman called Nicola Daly, who'd been recommended to me, who's actually the person who filmed with SBS on the current project, Go Back to Where You Came From, is that what it's called? And the film, which I hope we might be able to see tonight, but we have some problems with it, it was the first film that we completed and edited, and it was filmed by Nicola. It was her first film out of film school. She was recommended from the film school, and it's a beautifully done film. So in the period afterwards, on the basis of this grant, we filmed 52 ex-prisoners, telling their dreadful stories in many cases, moving but beautiful stories in a way, the stories of resistance. A group of people I'm very proud to be associated with. And in 1998 in London, I took the person who was probably the first East Timorese to be treated as a survivor of torture to a clinic known as the Medical Foundation in London, recommended by Amnesty International and run by a woman called Helen Bamba, who was a little bit of an inspiration for me. She had treated the first people coming out of Auschwitz. She had taken them to safety. She was part of the International Refugee Committee, and she had set up the clinic to begin treating them and employed doctors to treat people suffering the results of torture and trauma. And all those years later, in 1998, she was still there, by this time treating torture survivors coming out of places like Burma, Argentina, and Chile. And so I took a person called Olandino Maya Guterres to this clinic. He was the principal witness in the Balibo case, and that was a very interesting experience. And the man who treated him, the doctor who treated him, said something that was very interesting to me and which led to some other ideas. He looked at him and he said, "You're a brave, strapping fellow. I can see why they tortured you. They had to break you." And in fact, I have found that in the subsequent period that the people I'm dealing with, the torture survivors, are not just anybody, they're very special people. They are brave, courageous people. They were opinion makers and leading thinkers, and that's why they were chosen, because the process of torture, it involves torturing people to extract information, but also to try and subjugate a society. Because they were opinion makers, because they were leading figures in society, people that were highly respected, like Olandino, they had to try and break their will. They never did break their will, and that's why we have the Democratic Republic of East Timor today. Whether they were ex-guerrilla fighters or civilian torture survivors, they did not bend to the torturers, to the will of the torturers. Their spirits were not broken. Brave and wonderful people, and it's an honour for me to work with them. And that is the origin of the Living Memory Project. Our archive is unfinished. We filmed 52 people, but we've only succeeded in editing 14 of those interviews because we ran out of funds to do the editing. We've been editing very slowly now. It is a costly and labour-intensive process, and we hope very much to be able to finish that project, that editing in the coming period, and we're also seeking an archival building in Dili. We have great success in Dili in visiting communities and talking to people about the question of torture and the need to abolish torture once and for all, and to show the younger generation, we go to a lot of schools, to show the younger generation what happened, and they can see these people telling the story in their own words, in local languages, and because many people born after the occupation began had no contact with the guerrillas, they didn't know who the initial founders of the nationalist movement were, and so we keep the flame alive by showing these films to them.
It's an extraordinary project, and you've talked quite a bit about the importance of this documenting process because of the danger of these stories being lost. I think we'll come back to that in a second, but I want to bring Robert into the conversation now. Just to begin with, can you talk a bit about what brought you to Balibo as a project, what your first impressions were, and what the challenges for you as a filmmaker were in capturing a historical moment that was so raw and so immediate?
Yeah, I think the biggest two questions for me in making that film, and they were in many ways solved by Jill's work with the Living Memory Project during the development of the script, but the biggest challenge for me was the point of view. What point of view would you tell this story from? And the other challenge was the issue of fiction. You know, it wasn't a documentary. It was a feature film. And so I grappled with these two things over many, many years, and with great debate amongst the creative team. You know, do you tell this story from the point of view of these 5 young guys? Do you tell it from the point of view of Roger East? You know, do you tell it from the point of view of the young Jose Ramos Horta? And the issue for me as an Australian filmmaker with limited experience of East Timor, was one that kind of, because it was at the forefront of our discussions, led me to Dili and to Jill's Living Memory Project, which was, I guess, the turning point in the script. And Jill, who read many of the earlier drafts, would realise this. And I was actually putting all the drafts together the other day and thinking I should donate them to a library, because they do tell quite an interesting evolution of how to tell that story. But for those of you who've seen the film, it begins with an interview with a Timorese woman her story is being recorded, and she tells her own story. I went to Dili, and I went to the old prison. I looked at the files of the CAVR, and I met with Jill and looked at the work of the Living Memory Project, and was so profoundly inspired by this idea that these women were coming forward in the face of, you know, great tragedy and hardship to tell their story. But then the second challenge as a dramatist is, how do you depict that in a film that is a work of fiction? Like, how do you recreate that? And I was very fortunate to have the wonderful Bea Villegas, who played that role, who kind of took it on board with great commitment, and looked to her own experience of people she knew and the stories she'd been told. And we kind of filmed that scene with a very rough script, but we're trying however we could to emulate the power of what Jill has captured in her interviews. And I think it's a credit to Bea that she was able to do that as a non-actor at the time, and that we were able to just let this scene unfold. I mean, it's almost impossible. I mean, we grappled with the same issue of recreating, the tragedy of the murder of the Balibo 5, and the tragedy of the events of the invasion, because again, you're recreating these terrible events. And in a similar way, I tried to find a visual style, a cinematic style, to try and capture something that felt quite forensic. And interestingly, it was Jill's work with the coronial inquest and the detail of that work and trying to recreate what actually happened in Balibo that led us to try and be forensic about those events. But I think for me, and it was something that even in the critical reception to the film, and even today, there remains quite a lot of discussion about this issue of point of view. I feel that we made a really positive choice in terms of shifting away from it just being the story of these 5 young Australian-based guys. I think for myself, I kind of, I've never really gravitated to a whole kind of genre of American cinema, which is about, the kind of outsider, the Westerner comes into a country and saves the day. Because I feel, as history has shown, that the Timorese, through what Jill was talking about, and their incredible ability to resist what happened, saved the day. And yes, there were a lot of people outside that helped, but that resilient spirit in the face of great oppression and tragedy is something to really celebrate. And I think by framing the film with recreating one of these interviews that Jill had done, it was our way of trying to actually create that sense of that. It's such a tricky navigation when you're dealing with real events. But those fundamental principles in how we made that film were ones that really came out of that first trip I made to Dili, I think maybe 18 months before I made the film.
Some of those difficulties you talk about, I think, apply not just to a work of fiction like Balibo, but also to an oral history project like the Living Memory one, to do with the scope of the project, the scope of what you hope to capture, and the kind of aims that you're endeavouring to get out of it. Oral history projects like this one are often associated with truth and reconciliation process, that somehow it's not just about documenting to capture, but it's also a crucial ingredient in the healing process. Is that part of your objective for this, Jill?
Absolutely. And what we do is we just let the prisoners tell their own stories in a way, because we feel that that in itself is part of the healing. And indeed, I think it feels therapeutic for them. But I should say that we're also running a health program on the side as a result of seeing, hearing their stories and understanding their problems much more deeply. So we've run a very low-level series of health programs, low cost, we call them referral pathways, in which we take them to a Pradet, which is an NGO there working with survivors of psychosocial trauma, and for a general assessment, and then they go to see a GP and have a checkout, and we've had great success with that program, with that tiny little program, and our staff members accompany the people every day on all of their appointments and try and build up their confidence. That's part of the social work, sort of social activities that we want to do, and social welfare activities that we're hoping to conduct and continue to conduct in the future. We're running that parallel with the video archive, but we're also seeking a building in the centre of Dili, as I said, so that the communities can come to us, that we can receive international guests as well as local Timorese, radio stations, church people, anybody who wants to come and use our archive. We have transcripts that they can consult. They can come and see a film. But above all, we're concerned about the welfare of some of the people we have filmed have died before we've been able to edit their particular films. These ex-prisoners are aging, and many of them are dying with their basic problems were not resolved towards the end of their lives, and that's something very sad there. Rather like East Timor's walking wounded. If you think of the Australians who came back after World War I and World War II who couldn't speak to their families, these people carry their sad secrets around with them, and we would like to give them some comfort. So we're also hoping to have, if we had a building, we would also have a centre of community meeting place for the ex-prisoner community, where they could come each morning and read the papers and have a coffee and play chess. And we've already got the embryo of a lending library, which was unknown. A lending library was pretty unknown in Dili when we began that, and we chose the books especially. So yes, and I should say that what we have filmed, as I said, 52 films. I am more or less resigned to the idea that this should be a small, autonomous, in the sense of non-governmental archive. I think the films, we have 14 films, and they seem like quite a lot when we take them to an exhibition, so 52 is quite a lot for people to access. And when we got to that stage, when we finished the editing, I think we would probably try to film one film a year, perhaps, to add a film a year. And I would also like to tell some stories about the disappeared, the ex-prisoners who didn't make it, who were taken out for execution, such as the members of the Orient 5 band, who were taken from prison and we believe murdered, their bodies never found, and the story of Maria Goretti, a particularly moving story of a 16-year-old student who helped many, many other prisoners. She was cruelly tortured when she was a schoolgirl. She was finally released. She went out and continued her political activity. She was arrested again, taken to the mountains, and I've managed to trace some of her last steps, where she was last seen. Nobody knows where she's buried, and I have some photographs and her last letters. So stories like that, it would also be wonderful to tell.
I guess when I was talking about the scope of the project, part of what interests me is the trauma runs so much deeper than just the ex-prisoners, that it's an important component of the story to tell, but it's one part of it. Abel, how hard is it for the young nation to get that balance right between looking back and understanding and remembering and moving forward in the way that you talk about?
Yes, it is not... it's not easy in terms of keeping the balance. I suppose the view of leadership has been that we need to move on, but without forgetting the stories, what happened over those 24 years. And having this living memory project is really very, very important, to us as a society, as a country, because soon many of these people will go. Then you have no recording. You have, this is part of the history of the country. What happened in those 24 years. Now, there are people who. I remember when I first went back in '99, and then subsequently a few times, and I have friends who went, they were imprisoned, they were tortured, they carried scars in their body. And one of the things that someone told me was that you need to get them to talk about it. Don't let them keep it, but tell them to come out and talk about it. So I deliberately provoked them to talk, as a joke. Yeah. And of course some of my Australian friends didn't like it, but it was good to draw them out to talk, to talk about it. And they will gladly, talk about it as a joke, but it's also to I suppose, somehow do the cleansing in the same process. And they never, took offense, with that. And I, every time I see them, I keep joking, with them, because you are friends, you're like a family, so you can deal with it, that way. And there are people who still want to seek some kind of justice, which is understandable. But how you would do that, And as far as the government, what the government is doing, I mean, this is from all the political parties, is that you need to recognize them, which is giving them the awards, the pension while they live, but most importantly is this one. In terms of memory, it's to really keep this story for the next generation, because the present generation that experienced the war of 24 years will go soon. The next generation will have no idea. I mean, kids who have grown up after 2000, they, as far as they're concerned, their lives is paradise. There's no such thing as war. They don't experience those things. But those who were before 2000, before 99, they felt that in their body, and the stories that run. And so it is very important to keep it so that the next generation, as a society, we need to have these records. It's very important. And for the government is to deal with it, but the government cannot, I suppose, specifically just deal with one group. It is, you have over 1.1 million people to deal with in terms of their welfare. There is to do with health issues, education, food production. I mean, all these daily immediate needs that press in the government. Electricity. I mean, all these issues that people face in their daily lives. And but no one, and I'm sure no one, not in any of the leadership, will ever, feel that this is nothing, to worry about. Now they all feel deeply. I mean, the Prime Minister himself, he went through all that. He knows. He lived in the bush, and then many of the ministers, those that were imprisoned, and those who went, were subject to torture and all those things. They all feel, in themselves that something has to be done. But then you have all the other overwhelming issues that face you and demand your attention all the time. So it's not an easy task being in a government, in dealing with your people, your society that have been traumatized, for 24 years, and then but the healing process will take time, to go, and having these kind of recordings is very, very important, for people, and for people outside, to also learn about it, because what happened in East Timor, countries like Australia were accomplices to it.
Well, that was something I was going to touch upon, is that there's, in terms of a collective memory and a national memory, it seems to me there's a real risk of a new generation remembering the solidarity movement in Australia and those who fought for an independent East Timor. But that government complicity thing, when it comes to a battle for justice, how do you remember that in a way that stays meaningful diplomatically as well?
Well, I think the really most important lesson, I as a person feel is that all these stories have to be recorded, that such things should not happen to other people, whether it is in Asia, Africa, or anywhere else. This is the lesson to be learned, that this must not happen. But for that to happen, you got to have this, kind of filming that must have all these recordings that you must have, and then have to, whether it is done through the schools or gatherings like this that people talk about. So it's, in terms of our relationship with Indonesia, it's very, very important. Indonesians themselves, they also, many who have no idea what happened in East Timor, right? But now they come to learn and appreciate what really happened. And but that was, part of how every country, every society go through their story, go through their history. of what happened. Americans had civil war. Europeans used to kill each other. So everybody go through that process, and we are in the same process. Now, what is important is to go forward. Is that at the moment we have our relationship with Indonesia is absolutely good, very, very good. Just to give an example of when Reynaldo attacked the Prime Minister and shot the President, two of the guys who went over the border into Indonesia. Now, can you imagine find those two people among 240 million people? That's not an easy task. But they were picked up within 2 weeks and brought back. So that is something in terms of a reconciliation process and building the friendship, while you do not forget what really happened in the past. And that is the fundamental importance, that for Indonesians to know what happened, for our people to know what happened, for Australians to know what happened, for people in UK to know, people in America to know what really happened, because all were part of the whole sorry saga.
I can see you're itching to say something there, Jill. You're climbing off your chair.
I just wanted to make the point that in terms of what can be done now, I recognise that there are so many people and so many needs, and I agree that the pensions has been a wonderful development for the first time, giving pensions to old people and sick people. But I think that a very important point is that this is of great immediate relevance, because unresolved trauma leads to violence. And I think that the violence that we have seen, fortunately we are living through a period of social calm, but we can't guarantee that social calm until the problems of these people are resolved, because there is a generational cycle of violence. We know from our direct experience that the former political prisoners who themselves have suffered trauma, that in their households there's a much greater possibility of there being domestic violence being handed down to the children, who are then out in the streets, as we saw in 2006 and 2007. So I think that is really a reason why it shouldn't just be seen as digging up the past, as it tends to be a little bit. I'm sure that you would agree, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, I know.
You don't need to talk. Jill just put words in your mouth for you. You're done.
Actually, I mean, it is true, because we all have families and relatives, cousins, uncle, aunties, nephew, nieces, and we have that direct experiences, for that, but how do you balance, everything? To bring everybody along, and I think the government is doing its best to address these issues. But again, there is huge competing demands, on a government, and it's not that people don't want to do it, but you got to address these issues, and I'm sure that's what our Ministry of Health is doing, the Social Solidarity Department is doing. I mean, everybody do their best to really address, even privately among friends and family. You still talk about it and help each other in that way. And I'm sure we will go through it, and it will take time, for a healing process to complete. Yeah.
And establishing a storytelling tradition that is kind of honest and looking at not just, as you say, digging up the past, but looking at the current kind of echoes and ramifications. I'm curious, because I'm sure, Robert, that when you set out to make a film like Balibo, it's not a polemic. You're not looking to put forward a message, but at the same time, you must be acutely aware in creating a work of fiction around it that there are certain conclusions that you would hope the audience would reach about that time, about that place. Were there things in the making of the film that came to you that you hadn't previously been aware of, you hadn't previously thought about, only hearing about them in the kind of Australian media? Yeah,
I think it's an interesting question about how cinema can document history. And I guess I did have a bit of a polemic. I think the more research I did, there were certain things I wanted to show. You know, I wanted to show that the Balibo 5 were murdered and that they weren't killed in crossfire as I'd been told by my government. I wanted to show, the events of the invasion. And I did want the piece of cinema to capture, for history's sake, something. It's interesting when I think of the time of the Khmer Rouge, I think of the film The Killing Fields. You know, I think as a nation, Australians think of the events of Gallipoli, and they think of the film Gallipoli, and it's a bit of a heavy burden you take as a filmmaker when you think that you are trying to document something as a work of a feature film, not a documentary. But I would say never more than anything I've done, the film evolved with new information at every stage. I don't think the screenplay... I mean, I know people say that a film screenplay is written 3 times. It's written on the page, it's written when you're filming, and it's written when you're editing it. And I think this is certainly an example, because so much information was being presented to us as we made it. Right down to, practical things. Jill finds a few friends of Roger East in Darwin. They meet Anthony LaPaglia. He comes and feeds some more information in. We travel to East Timor. I mean, I created a situation for the young actors playing the Balibo 5 where they flew into East Timor for the first time, and we filmed the scenes of the journalists arriving for the first time. And we recreated the journey for them going to Balibo, and they chose to sleep in the Australia house as the journalists had, and along the way they would feed back to me very personal things about their own experiences and research of these young men that would inform the story. I mean, it was hard for me as a filmmaker because I kind of think my mind on my previous films was very rigid, and I tend to kind of think a bit more kind of scientifically about storytelling, but it was impossible to do that with this film. Right down to the fact that the coronial findings came out, I think, 2/3 of the way through the script development. So, I came and attended some of the interviews there where, many Timorese had very courageously come to Sydney to tell their experiences of what they'd seen. And right up until the 11th hour of the script, that was informing the story. But I guess I'd say the thing I grappled with all of that was that responsibility. If this film is going to be part of the way people remember that story, then how accurate do I have to be about certain things? I think, looking back on it, showing, the President Ramos Horta the film, the story between his character as a young man and Roger East, it was very playful. We had a bit of fun with that. I wouldn't be claiming that as historic accuracy. But the story of the Balibo 5 we were forensic about, and that's why it feels very different in the film. We almost only used moments that we had evidence had happened, and then we used the work that Jill and the coroner and had put together as a kind of way of depicting the murders.
I'm an Australian, but I can't say that I'm proud, and I will not hold my head up high until Australia apologises to East Timor for turning their back on them for those 25 years. And not only that, Australia owes East Timor because during the war, when the East Timorese looked after the Australian soldiers and the Japanese tortured the East Timorese. So I'm going to have a 2-part question. One, would you like an apology from our government? Will that help with the healing process? And 2, why did Australia turn their back on East Timor? Was it because of oil, and was it easier to buy the oil from Indonesia than East Timor? Or were they frightened Indonesia might invade Australia, or what?
Come on, Mr. Ambassador, your most diplomatic answer. I think Gareth Evans is in the 3rd row, so we'll go to him next. So just...
Okay, the first question about the apologies, I suppose that's up to our Australian friends. to make that decision, but I don't think we will need to demand one. And I think it is for Australia as a society, as a country, and as a people to reflect on that. So I would not ask for apologies, from Timor-Leste. No, we would not do that. If Australians decide to do an apology, then we welcome. If it's not, then let's move on. Yes. But Australia is, to be fair, despite the past, Australia, everywhere I go around the country, there is this really strong sentiment for East Timor. And, many, even people in the DFAT tells me, East Timor is probably the only lucky ones that have this huge sentiment around the population, much more than Papua New Guinea. And that's true. Yes, there is always warmth. It's regardless from what political background, religious backgrounds, Australians have that, by and large have that strong feelings for East Timor. And that is very important. And that's what you're doing to help us to stand on our own feet. As your neighbor, geographically we can't choose. We are neighbors forever. So therefore we've got to work together. And you being a developed society, developed economy, we only start as a baby, walking. You can give us a helping hand, and you are doing that. Australian government is doing that. Individuals, families, schools, the friendship, local government, local community, everybody is doing this. So in this sense, yes, we are pleased that Australians have not forgotten us, and I'm sure you will continue to stand by us until such time as yes, we can walk by ourselves, but helping us to stand on our feet, that's very, very important. The second question, what was that again?
It was about why Australia was, for 25 years, a little less good neighbour.
I suppose if you see at the time, the height of the Cold War, Vietnam, US just lost the war in Vietnam, so there was this huge fear of communism running over the entire Southeast Asia, and it will come and swallow up Australia at the same time. And there was those kind of fears, and politics. State politics at the time. It was felt that East Timor was better off under Indonesia. Yeah, but what they didn't realize, that East Timorese would have fought for the next 24 years. And that's what they didn't realize. And so now it has a proven case. But I think, a lot of those reasons, what happened then, there is a lot of, I think secret cables are now become available after 30 years. So it's open, so anyone can really find out why those decisions were made. Why did Australia look the other way? That's the question. Why did Australia look the other way? And there's part of the whole world politics at the time. And but as far as I'm concerned, as far as we're concerned, we are free now, and you are helping us. That's what it matters. Yes.
Geographically, I'm stuck next to a neighbour who helps himself to the lemons that go over the fence from my tree. They say it's on a maritime boundary. I'm not sure what that means. It seems unfair.
Okay, the maritime boundary, I think I could almost say that, well, Australia as a people, ordinary people, Australians always go for the underdog. Always give everybody a fair go. But Australia, when it comes to Australia as a state, it plays hard-ball, cold-blood game. Yes. On Australian interests. And this is exactly where we are at. So, in a sense also, we, as a young nation, poor, the poorest in Southeast Asia. Yeah, we are sharing the wealth with you. You should be happy. Yes.
We should be ashamed. I'm editorializing instead of taking your questions. There's one over here.
Hi, thanks very much for putting on this panel at the Wheeler Centre. It's great. I'm engaged in doing oral histories with former political prisoners from the 1960s, the former members of the Indonesian Communist Party who were jailed and killed in the transition to power of the Suharto regime. And I guess in this discussion about historical memory and forgetting, I mean, when Abel talks about, we need to move on and look to the future from the point of view of the Timorese, I mean, I just sort of reflect on the fact that many people sort of forgot about the killing of 500,000 people to 1 million people in Indonesia and allowed this dictatorship to come to power. And then 10 years later, you have things like the invasion of East Timor. And so I just wonder how, in terms of writing the national history of East Timor, creating the museums and those kinds of nation-building projects that East Timor is no doubt embarking upon, how do you reflect on some of those episodes, but how do you name the sort of the enemies, if you like, in terms of the Indonesian military, the countries that stood by and were complicit in this process? How do you represent a lot of those things when some of the messaging of the government seems to be a little bit different to that as well? I'm interested in how you view that in terms of writing the textbooks and those kinds of national history making. That's sort of a comment and a question, but I wanted to ask Jill about the process of collecting the interviews and so on. The 52 people that you interviewed, did you try and profile some of those people to try and sort of represent a certain sample of the people who were imprisoned, or did the 52 just sort of come according to who you were able to interview, and what sort of spread were you able to gather in terms of the urban, rural areas and the districts of East Timor that were represented in that? Thank you.
Thank you. Sadly, we don't have a representative sample of the country because of our economic limitations. After 5 years of activity, our only means of transport at this moment is a motorbike, and we've had to hire cars if we go out in the districts. We did have the support of the International Organisation of Migrations for some time, which used to carry our exhibitions out to Balcao and to other areas, to Aileu. We would get used to their big trucks to carry our panels out there. So we were sort of really restricted by our economic situation. But on the 52 families, well, it began with the first ex-political prisoners we knew, and I think largely with the employment of my dear colleague Maria da Silva Benfica, who indicated to us other political prisoners. And Maria is a walking list of political prisoners of East Timor, and we interviewed one, and they would indicate another one. So we do so a lot of our material is around Dili. We were very happy when we interviewed our first Chinese Timorese political prisoner, Mr. Akwe Leong, who has a Melbourne connection. And we did a session of filming in Los Palos also, which was very good, but we've been unable to edit that material partly because of language difficulties, and we are working on that. So our spread is not very large, but I think that we do have, but most of the people were arrested in different places because some of them were fighting in the mountains, and we had a few women who were teachers behind the lines, really. They were, and one was a sort of bush nurse who was collecting traditional herbs to use for medicines and making medicines behind the lines for the injured in the guerrilla war. So I think there is quite a, and we have got, I think we've got a balance of people from the Fretilin and UDT parties, less from the UDT parties, but then it was, perhaps it's arguable, but it seemed to be a bit smaller than Fretilin. So yeah, I think, and we have quite a lot of women. We don't have, I think we have about a third of the people we interviewed are women. So many of them were in the clandestine front rather than, there weren't in fact, I don't believe that there were many women who had a full role as active role as guerrillas. They travelled with the guerrillas and they had ancillary tasks in many cases. So, yeah, we have women. The women were mainly couriers and played a very, very important role. As I know, when I was behind the lines in 1994, some of my documents were carried in and out of Dili by women who were school teachers, young people who took enormous risks to carry that material on my behalf as a journalist.
That I mean, it's great that you're doing this for the 1965 and what happened in Indonesia, but for East Timor to write its own history, this would have to be done of facts. You're not going to put pseudonyms on things. There were players, political players, military players. At the time that, CAVR has documented all these, facts. So I'm sure that when we write the history of the country, we're not going to, change to be just as good, but to really establish the facts, because this is what, you want to get the next generation to learn and understand, and not to repeat the same mistakes. That's the issue. But it's one of those things that if you, just like if you don't oil the car and fuel, it will go rust. Society is the same. There has to be this dynamic, evolving, revolving all the time. Because once you stop, you go rust, and then everything will be forgotten. So I'm sure in East Timor we will be having that, and I'm sure with the friendship that is now running quite well with Indonesia, because what happened then doesn't reflect on the present Indonesian leadership. It doesn't reflect on them. That was the regime at the time, and so that was part of the history. And when you write it, you have to write the facts. Who were the players, the actors on those times, decision makers in those times. I suppose in Australia is the same. You'll have former Senator Gareth Evans and Ali Alatas, signing the agreement, fly over Timor-Leste. Well, that's a part of the history. No one is going to change that. Yes, and so yeah, to assure you, the history will be written as the fact, as how it was, because there are all that evidence fakes even in CAVR reports all there. So you really can't avoid it or run away from it, because if you do that, it will do injustice to the next generation of people who want to know the facts. Yeah, and for people around the world, who want to know. Yeah.
I know it's very naive of me, but I want accountability. I'm so cynical about government's capacity to. I think memory becomes an incredibly selective thing when it comes to secret cables being released or known facts or whatever else. How confident are you that knowing this stuff, remembering these stories, is a powerful enough tool for stopping it from happening again? Sorry, I'm sure you have questions. I got distracted.
No, this will, as I said before, it's a dynamic issue. And you're going to have people who will not allow children of those who were tortured, who were in prison. They're not going to allow this to, just lapse. They'll be talking about it and make sure that the government do the right thing by them and by the society as a whole. So it will happen. I can assure you that it will happen. Because for East Timor, the entire society was part of the whole thing. It was not only one section. It was the entire country. Yeah. So it touched everybody. No single family was intact. Every family was touched. Was touched by the whole war. So it's not going to be easily forgotten. But again, it's when people get into a comfortable life, of course things can go wayside. unless you've got organizations, like Living Memory, that will keep at the public eye all the time. You need to have these organizations that will continue to evolve and get, be dynamic about it in terms of schools need to learn about it. You can be proactive to say that if history was written, then it's been changed for some unknown reasons, then you pinpointed it. And that's what I can tell you. We're very lucky that our civil society is so dynamic. The government cannot get away with anything. Yes, and this is very good. And we encourage that to happen because every organization, every society, they all play their role in the society, to make the society better. And that's very important, and we encourage that.